Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our fourth webinar. If someone's got their speaker on, it might be yourself, Sally. Can you just turn your volume down on your machine?
I was going to do things I don't know how to do.
We're lucky to have Sally today. Sally's a business transformational change specialist. I first met Sally back in the Area 10 ASC contract days, where Sally led a transformational program for the contract, which involved about 300 or so people and about 17 or 18 individual projects that went on to turn that contract around and take us to where we are. So I know Sally's going to touch on that today. So I'm going to just by saying thanks again for everybody to join. I hope you're enjoying these webinars. We've got a great program over the next 9 or 10 weeks. Please feel free to drop in and drop out as you choose. And I'm going to pass you over to Sally now, and Sally's going to take you through transitioning through the change curve, which I hope you all find interesting. So, no, I do. All right, over to you, Sally.
Thank you very much. So just to let everyone know, I can only see my presentation screen. So if you raise any questions, I'll just have to be come through Stuart. So good afternoon. Firstly, thank you to Stuart for arranging this series of lunch and learn sessions and helping me today with the technology. We may yet need more help. And a positive outcome of the lockdown is I'm getting much better with technology, and I sort of wrote that in my notes, but I'm beginning to doubt it because I'm still learning. So if things do go wrong, then just forgive me. We'll have a few interactive moments during this presentation, and Stuart's going to run some polls. I'm going to be talking for between 40 and 45 minutes. Happy to take questions during the session, but I suspect it's going to be easier to do them at the end, where we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for any questions you want to ask. And they can be about the change curve or any change matters. I've been working in the field of change for 20 plus years, and there's not many situations that I haven't come across in that time. So the objectives for this session were to understand how we transition along the change curve. So, and then thinking about the behaviours you experience and that you experience from others. So the behaviours on the change curve are normal. As humans, we all go through them. I'll share some tips and techniques to adapt your approach. So as we're going through, I'll talk about some practical things that we did on the change projects that I've worked on. Which will help you in your lean world, and also the importance of the change curve for sustained change. So I really want to help bring this to life for you so that you can see how you can adapt your approach depending on whether people are positive or negative, and also where people are along the change curve. So firstly, who am I? So Stuart introduced me. I was involved in the Area 10 transformation. My name's Sally Palethorpe. I've run my business, Inspired Partners, since 2004. We're a change management consultancy. We help businesses large and small manage their way through change, be that cultural change, new organisational structures, processes, ways of working, or developing leaders for the future. But I'm an engineer by training and qualification, and started my career as an apprentice with British Aerospace, and moved on to designing and installing manufacturing systems before designing people and change systems. So as I said, worked with Stuart in Area 10, where I helped architect and implement the concept of integrated project teams, working within the Balfour Beatty Mott McDonald joint venture, and also with the Highways England customer community. And I've also worked with Balfour Beatty Rail, again, looking at collaborative working. I do a lot of work in the defence sector, working with the MOD, Thales, Kinetic, Leonardo and Raytheon, and also others in the private sector. And for my sins, I lecture on 3 master's programmes at the University of Bath on change management. And that's all I'm going to talk about the company, about me, because I think this is more important that you get some new knowledge from today. So I'm going to do an introduction. So start with a little bit of theory to make certain that we're all have the same level of understanding. I'm sure for some of you this is going to be a refresher, but I believe that we can all learn all the time, so I hope you'll get something from the session. And then I'm going to walk through the change curve step by step using the pandemic as my case study with a few other examples included. Talk about some of the tips and techniques and just bring those together. Mention some alternative models that if you wanted to, you could go and explore further, and then finish with a Q&A. I thought I'd start because I think we're all craving, some of you may be able to do this, but all craving to go out maybe for a cup of coffee, meet with some friends, and I found this particular cartoon around the diffusion of innovation model, and I just thought it made me smile. And one of the things that you're doing as lean practitioners is helping people at different stages along that process or along that model. So, and it's dealing with individuals and teams who are in those different categories. So thinking about where you're going to choose to focus your energies for continuous improvement. And change management can help you work across that innovation model. So let's start with what we mean by change. So it's movement of an entity from its current state to another desired state. And by entity, that can be organisation, it can be team, it can be individuals. Or in our case at the moment, it could be the country. But it's movement from one state to another state. It can be planned, you can think about it in advance, or it can be a response to an internal external shift. And we can see where we are at the moment. And change can impact on policies, processes, culture, the technology that you use, your business strategy, the people in the business. So it can impact lots of different areas, or it can be quite small and quite focused. And it's about understanding where it impacts, which is part of setting yourself up for success. It can be radical or incremental, but it's around us all of the time. So we exist in a world of change, and I think that's more true today than it has ever been. But before I talk about the change curve, again, just wanted to talk about when I'm training people in change, when I'm lecturing in change, I talk about it from 3 different perspectives. So first of all, you need to understand the what. What is the change that you're looking to do? So having a clear vision for the change, understanding the need, understanding what outcomes that you're looking to achieve so that you can define the scope of the change. If it's, I'm putting a new IT system in, well, are you just implementing a new IT system? Do you want people to have been trained in the IT system, or do you want everyone to be using the new IT system? Because dependent on what the outcomes that you are will depend on what the scope of that change is. So that's the what, and there's some models around that. The how is how are you going to implement the change? And Kotter's 8-step model is the most common reference point for this. It doesn't work in all instances, but it has its problems, but it's a good framework to use. And it's about planning for the change, not hoping for the change. If you don't put any effort into these soft, some people will call them fluffy change aspects, then all the research states that your chances of being successful in delivering the anticipated outcomes are between 0 and 40%. Sadly, most change programs still fail to deliver all the benefits because people don't do the change stuff properly. So it's about making certain that you actually put change activities into the plan. And then the who, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit more today with the change curve. So the who's about the main sponsors, the stakeholders, managing those stakeholders, and then the individuals and how you communicate with them. So how you manage the individuals transition through that curve and how you engage and involve them. And as I said, it's a constant in our society. It is multifaceted. It's not straightforward. And the earliest model that I know of was by a gentleman called Lewin, who had the 3-step model, which was unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And that was in 1943. And potentially, then it was fine to do that, and you could then work for a little bit, and then you maybe do a different change. But the reality is today that we work in the world of slush when it comes to change. We have a change on change on change. So making certain that we understand all the different facets of that change, who all our stakeholders are. Different stakeholders will have different contexts. And often those changes are not linear in nature, and they go and they deviate all over the place. And it's about making certain that you keep sight of those end outcomes. But I think for any change, and I think all program managers should understand that our emotions change. and sometimes we're not in control of those emotions. So I'm not going to spend long on this slide, but the change curve that I'm going to talk, it's from 1969, and it talks about the 5 stages of grief. And it was developed to help counsellors support people who were going through the grieving process. And sometimes a change can feel like a bereavement, especially if you're wanting to change something that the individual invented. I've done that a couple of times. So it's a system that they've devised and grown over 10, 15 years. Or it's been something that people have been doing for a very long time and they feel quite associated with that, and it's part of who they are. So I want to talk about the change curve, slightly changed from Kubler-Ross. So talk about positive change and negative change. So if you're going through the change from a positive perspective, then you start with uninformed certainty. You're not quite certain what's happening, but you know it's going to happen. As you move along the change curve, you get a bit more of an understanding. So you've got a few doubts and think, oh, how's that going to work then? As you get the answers to some of your doubts and some of the questions, you get some realistic concerns and you know maybe what you're facing, and then you get to a place of informed certainty. And I will go through this slower time. If you're on a negative change curve, then you start with immobilization, denial, anger. You transition down into bargaining and depression. I have to say at this point that's not clinical depression, it's just a state of being depressed. And then you want them to go through exploration and acceptance. And you'll notice that the axes on the 2 graphs are slightly different. So one's around confidence, one's around emotional intensity. I think the most important thing to say is it's a model, not a science. So we will all transition through this model at some point in our times, and sometimes within 5 minutes, sometimes over 18 months. So before I carry on, I'm just going to ask you a few questions. So the first question is, can you move from the positive change curve to the negative change curve and vice versa? So I'm going to assume, Stuart, that you're putting the poll up.
I am. It's coming right now. About 70% of the people have answered so far. Give it another couple of seconds for the last few. A resounding yes on that one, Sally.
Excellent. No one fell into my trap. Okay, so the next question. Have you experienced moving from one curve to another?
Just a few more to answer. Again, very much heavily weighted towards the yes, Sally.
Okay. And it's interesting, isn't it, to be aware of your own behaviours and emotions. And then the last question, have you witnessed others moving between the 2 curves?
Again, very heavily weighted to the yes camp there.
Excellent. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for participating in that. And I think it's about, as people that work in business, it's about understanding and sometimes recognizing where people are and their behaviors. And what you'll see as you go through the change curve is that you can read people's signals by what they say, how they say it, how they behave, and you can get an indication of where they are along the change curve. And if you listen to yourself, you can also see where you are on the change curve. And I suspect during the pandemic that we're in at the moment that a few of us have had a few moments where we flip between the positive and the negative change curve. So what I've done on this one is just consolidate the two change curves together. I did have a moment with myself that maybe red should be negative and black should be positive, but hey. So it's about understanding where people are on this curve by the behaviours and the language that they use. And it also means that you don't take it personally if people are in the early stages of the negative curve. So I've worked on a few change projects where people have become quite angry. But they're not actually angry with me, they're angry with what I represent as the project manager making the change happen. So I'm going to walk us through a common experience which we'll all have experienced differently. So the current pandemic and lockdown, which means lots of different things to different people. Some families have lost loved ones, others are working from home, there's homeschooling going on, people have been furloughed and unsettled by that. So lots of different emotions and lots of different experiences. And I'll try and use that as the main case study as we're going through this, but I will introduce some other ones as we go. So we've established that the change curve can be positive or negative, and we can move between these emotions. It follows a path, and we're trying to reduce the dip in that path, and we're trying to narrow the two sides, but it's not always in our gift to do so. There are some tools that we can use to help us along the journey. We all travel along this curve, and for some it could be quite quick, and others it can take months or longer. And we all have a predisposition to be either optimistic or pessimistic. That can be influenced by those that are around us, and influences whether your cup is half full or half empty, but that will also have an impact on whether you sort of err towards the negative change curve or the positive change curve. So I'm going to walk through 5 stages with a couple of purposeful diversions. So the key word for the pandemic is uncertainty, I think. And it's greater than many of the change challenges that I typically deal with and that you typically deal with at work. So we're starting this from a position of uncertainty. So if we think about shock's a sudden, upsetting or surprising event or experience which can reduce our ability to think and act. So bulk buying toilet rolls and other provisions is not rational, and it's partly due because people were in a state of shock. There were other reasons, but that's one of the reasons. Denial can follow closely behind shock with a refusal or unwillingness to accept something is changing or the reality of the situation. So again, we saw that in the early days. This doesn't affect me, I'm going to go off for a walk in Snowdonia. In business, we see probably less shock as people are drip-fed messages, formally or through the rumour mill. That's not always the case. But denial is certainly evident. Many of you will have heard the words when you're looking to implement something new. Well, it didn't work last time, or we're a unique sector, this won't work here. It's not automotive, you know. So you can hear some of the language that people are using. And information can be sought at this stage, especially if you're more positive about it. So should we be wearing face masks was one of the early questions that people were asking. The second stage is anger, if you're on the negative curve. This is when the realisation of the change hits home and individuals understand the gravity of the situation. They can be angry and looking for someone to blame. This anger can manifest itself in many ways. Angry at the world in general, blaming others for not doing the right things, we should have tested earlier, or internalising the anger and becoming irritable and short-tempered with those around them. So when I worked on a project in Northern Ireland where we were doing a major change for an organisation of 500, very early on in that we got, well, when I say we, I got 2 threatening letters. They were left in the change area saying that we needed to leave the project, leave the company, and there would be consequences if we didn't. And that they were, you know, when you sort of sit back and think about them, that's quite that's quite threatening. But actually, they weren't angry at me. They were angry at what I represented as the program manager for this change. And sometimes it's you just have to separate yourself out from those emotions. If you're on the positive curve, you're now in uninformed certainty, or uninformed optimism, as it's sometimes called. You know the change is happening, but you don't know what that means and don't have the necessary facts and figures. And typically when you're here, you want to do something, so you focus on the task at this point because you don't understand the whole situation. And you'll see that lots of people started doing simple jobs, decorating, gardening, exercise. So people are looking for information to build their own understanding as well. They were watching the daily updates, looking for more news, looking for online information, talking to the colleagues, talking to friends, just trying to build a picture for themselves. So when you're managing change in business, giving people the information they crave at this point can really help make the change more successful as you're going through. Stage 3 of the change curve means we're moving towards the bottom of the dip. If you're on the negative curve, you're now at the bargaining stage. Many in the media were displaying this in week 4. Just tell us what's next, as the nation needs to know. And this was happening across the nation with homeschooling challenges. Just 5 more minutes before I do my math session. The bargaining stage can lead people being fearful, and depression can set in, leaving individuals immobilised and not doing much, like a rabbit in the headlights. You will have seen bargaining at work when you're looking to implement lean projects. Can we do this as this part of the change, but leave another part untouched, please? I think the other team needs to work in a different way, but actually very effective and efficient in how we work. So thinking about the bargaining phase, did another project where we had all the senior teams needed to apply. We opened all the senior positions up for interview, and one of the people that had been in the project for 20 plus years came for the interview. He applied, and his opening statement was, I'd like to get the job because I'd like to put it back to where I think it should be. So he was bargaining with the project. He didn't actually get that position. So if you're on the positive curve, you've moved into informed doubt. You understand more about the change and may now be feeling more pessimistic than optimistic, sharing some of the same worries as those on the negative curve. So effective and frequent communications are vital to move people through this stage, answering and addressing some of their doubts and worries. So an example of someone who is on the in informed doubt, we were introducing open plan working in an organisation, and one of the directors decided to move early out of his office. He then started getting calls to meetings with his managers, and those managers still had offices, and he would go to their offices to have the meetings. And he felt very uncomfortable for this because he felt it was undermining some of his authority. So he said, I'm going to move back into my office. That would have been catastrophic for the project because it would have said that open plan working doesn't work. So what we did is we agreed that he would have a meeting room that he could call up meetings. So it was his, but he didn't actually move back into an office. So he went from being very positive and supportive to the change to being negative about the change and very worried about it, and then back to being supportive of it. And part of our role, if you're helping people make this transition, is to help them transition along the curve. So my first diversion is to the washing machine. And before I move on to stage 4, I thought I'd mention the fluid nature of the change curve. So as individuals move along the curve, they can sometimes switch between being positive to negative, as I've said. They can also be moving along the change curve towards stage 4 when an event happens that throws them back to stage 2 or 3. I refer to this as the washing machine cycle of change. Just as a washing machine agitates clothes and moves them around, so can individuals' knowledge and experiences. And it can happen numerous times, as different wash cycles last for different times, but they all do finish eventually, and you have to keep that in your heart. So, and being furloughed will, I suspect, be creating some of those emotions. How long will I be furloughed for? Will the business survive? Is going back going to be difficult because I'm used to working from home now? Why me? Why wasn't it Fred? So lots of emotions. Some of them will be positive, some of them less so. And you can't predict the event that might happen that might cause people to go into the washing machine cycle. It can be tangible or it could be intangible. So if we think about Area 10 as an example, there was a team lead who ran one of the functional teams. So, and what we were doing with Area 10 was introducing integrated project teams, which meant we mixed up all the functions together. So this particular individual didn't want to become a team leader for a multidisciplinary team. He was very happy being a team leader for a functional team. And he nearly handed his notice in, which would have been a real loss to Area 10. So what we had to do is we had to talk to him about what his concerns were. We gave some coaching, we listened to those concerns, we gave him some training. And after a while, he decided he'd take on the role on a trial basis. And eventually he became one of our star team leaders. And he was brilliant, and he was a real advocate moving forward as well. So you can move people through that washing machine cycle and get them to a good outcome. But it does take a little bit of energy and effort and thinking about it. So I've got another poll now to hand over to Stuart. So I'll put it up on the screen and just talk through it. So what I wanted you to think about is, from a lean perspective, what's most likely to cause people to get caught in the washing machine cycle. So I've given you 4 examples here. There could be others, but 4 examples that will resonate hopefully with you. So a trial not delivered, a senior manager not acknowledging the benefits of lean, supplier failing to deliver time, delaying a trial, and a colleague being negative about lean over a cup of coffee, real or virtual. So I'll hand over to Stuart now again.
Questions up on screen, getting the answers coming in.
Excellent.
It's very close, this one. A couple of people changing their minds. I'll give it a few seconds just for the last couple of people to add the responses. Right, so the question with the most responses, or the answer with the most responses, Sally, is answer number 2, a senior manager not acknowledging the benefits of lean.
Okay, and which is the one with the least?
The third one, a supplier not delivering on time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. It was a bit of a trick question, really, because any of those statements could place an individual into the washing machine cycle. And we do go through that wash cycle and spin cycles before emerging. But I think senior management support is absolutely vital. So I'm not surprised that the majority put a senior manager, many of you put senior manager not acknowledging the benefits of lean. Because you can be going in and working with teams, and if the senior manager then comes in and says, well, I know we need to do lean, but you need to deliver, then it just undermines it all. And I've sort of put that in as a bit of a word of caution for any senior managers who've joined the call, to make certain that they realise that the shadow that they cast is bigger than they think it is. So, but all 4 of those could be triggers that will take people into the washing machine cycle. So stage 4, for those on the negative curve, it's about exploration, which can be difficult if individuals want to stay where they feel comfortable and don't want to explore options or engage with new ideas. And I'm sure from a lean perspective, you've seen this a few times. On the positive curve, individuals can now articulate their realistic concerns as they've transitioned along gathering information and knowledge. And in both instances, it's important to listen to individuals to help them continue on their journey. So, and a significant part of change management is getting people to voice their concerns and then addressing those concerns as soon as possible. That doesn't mean that you're going to change the direction of travel. It means you're going to be honest with the answers, but try and help them to understand why the change is happening. And the daily briefings have been a good way to get information out to the people. You can have a debate, which we won't, about how correct the information is and what they've not been telling us, because people will be validating that information through other media for good and for bad. So, but thinking about how you get people to explore that. And in business change, this is often seen as a learning phase when you roll out training to the majority. This again may not be comfortable for individuals. So whichever curve they're on, you need to think about how do you make that training engaging and relevant for them. So the training can really help people transition along the change curve, I've found, if you think about maybe giving them an opportunity at the beginning of the training to voice some of their concerns. It might have been the first time that they've been exposed to it. So rather than just leaping into training, which is we have a propensity to do, I think sometimes, it's giving people a little bit of time maybe at the beginning of the training to explore and raise some of the concerns they've got. So you're using the training as a way to help people along the change curve. So my next diversion is going back to my engineering days and a non-return valve. And I know that's quite an old-fashioned non-return valve, but I like the fact that you'd actually have to turn the handle on this one. So it's important for sustained change to put tangible interventions in place that will prevent individuals from slipping back down the change curve. So, and I refer to this as a non-return valve, and it prevents things from moving back in the direction it came from. And I'm sure there'll be a number of measures put in place to prevent backflow during this pandemic, and we can see some of them already. So there's legislation to reinforce the lockdown with consequences, minimal, but consequences. We're starting to hear different language, so talk about the new norm as a phrase, and that signpost that moving forward things will be different. And there are a number of interventions that we use with our clients that the government are using and businesses are using today to reinforce that new norm. So, and I suspect you'll use some of these yourself. So technology in the proposed contact tracing app. Whilst voluntary, it will be a permanent reminder to keep yourself and others safe. The working environment, which we use to great effect in Area 10 because we completely redesigned the working environment, but it's being used as a physical manifestation of the change for the pandemic. We've got the 2-metre yellow markers, hand sanitizer, one-way systems appearing both in businesses and in the retail sector. And then documenting the new ways of working to help people understand what behaviours are expected of them alongside the process changes. So the humble non-return valve is an important component when making any change to prevent things from going back to the old normal. So again, just a poll. So from a lean perspective, which of the following interventions are you most likely to use as a non-return valve? So we've got rewriting and issuing a revised or new process, issuing a ways of working document describing new behaviours, changing the equipment being used to an updated version, changing people's role definitions to mirror their new responsibilities, or running online training for a new process. So back to Stuart. Are you there, Stuart?
Yep, we've got the question on screen. Answers are coming in. I thought I lost the question. I had to type it out again. So far, number one, rewriting and issuing processes is leading with 3, 4, and 5, even at 5.2.
Okay.
Yeah, answer number one. Just come out top on that one.
And for me, that's fascinating and probably not surprising. So I didn't say when I did my introduction, but I used to be Business Improvement Director for one of the Thales divisions. And when I was Business Improvement Director, I looked after process improvement. And one of the things that you often find with process improvement is that you write a brilliant process, you issue that brilliant process, and then nobody uses it. There are companies, and you may work for these organisations, where if someone writes a process, then that process is automatically followed by everyone. Automotive is a very good example of this particular sector. But it is one of the things that I think we often fall down on a little bit, that thinking that we've written it down, so therefore people will follow it. So what I would recommend is that if that's your main way of reinforcing some of your lean processes, that you would also do some of the other aspects. Now, again, you could only pick one. So, but what I would recommend is that if you're rewriting and issuing or a new process, that you're also thinking about, do the training and think about, do we want people's behaviours to change? And how do we maybe go back to make certain that not only have they read the process, they've been trained in the process, and that they're using the process. So not assuming that by issuing the process that process will be read. So, but I am making lots of assumptions there, so I apologise for that. There is another one on there, which is a very clean way of making a change, which is changing the equipment being used to an updated version. So if you remove the old equipment and they only have that one way of working, then that's quite a good way of having a non-return valve. It does assume that they can use the equipment in the way that you want them to do it. And the main thing for this is to start thinking early on when you're doing a change about what you need to put in place. So what things will form your non-return valve? So if you need to change people's role definitions, for example, that can take time. So just with any engineering design, put place from the outset. So think about your non-return valve at the beginning of the change rather than towards the end of the change. So stage 5 is the last stage, and if you're on the negative curve, you'll probably get to a place of acceptance, where you consent to receive or undertake whatever is being asked of you. You may never like the change and always hark back to the good old days, and I'm sure we've all heard people say it was much better when we used to do X, Y, or Z. And I have examples of individuals who never liked the change but did realise that it was going to happen, that it was never as good before in their eyes. And it's called informed certainty if you're on the positive curve. You know what's happening and you can embrace the new norm. Individuals who've reached this stage before their colleagues will notice maybe that people are at different places, because we all travel along the change curve at a different pace. Some may seek to help others move along that change curve. And actually, those early adopters can become advocates for the change, and they can really help their colleagues see that the change is not all bad. And the team leader I mentioned earlier from Area 10 was one of these, so he became a real advocate for the change that we're putting in place. I have to say this is the one stage of the change curve that I find difficult to think about from a pandemic perspective, because I don't think we're really there yet. So, but it is about building a brighter future for the business and for the individuals. And then how do we move forward from there? So in summary, everyone has an emotional response to change. We all experience a dip in our personal responses, and seemingly negative behaviours are normal. It's about how you manage those. We can travel the change curve many times, and you need to adopt different strategies and think about where you use on different places in the change curve. So I said I'd talk about some tips and techniques. I've mentioned most of these, I believe and hope, as we've been going through. So involve people. So surface resistance. The sooner you can surface the resistance, listen and respond to it, the sooner you can move forward. Run workshops, focus groups, any format that will enable you to get people to voice their concerns, voice their opinions. Make certain that you think about your stakeholders and manage those stakeholders both upwards and downwards. Involve your sponsors. So if you've got a positive sponsor, then that can make a real difference. And then build in your non-return activities early on. Communicate. So it says here regular, frequent, honest. I think people really respect being talked to honestly, and make certain that they're two-way. I had one customer, well, National Audit Office many years ago now, and they didn't communicate because they hadn't got the message completely clear. And what was made up was much worse than what they were going to be communicating. So think about communications. You can't do too much of it. Actively listen. Don't just listen and hear what you want to hear. And use positive language. There was a great example of this on the radio the other day. So they were talking about abandoned the strategy, which for me means that it wasn't a good strategy and we abandoned it, versus revised the strategy. So again, when you're using language, when you're talking with people, think about the impact that the language you use will have on them. So just wanted to talk a little bit about Area 10. How are we doing for time? So it was a 5-year contract. It was awarded in 2012. It was a joint venture between Balfour Beatty and Mott MacDonald. And it had a very poor track record in project delivery. And then a new contract director joined in 2015, who I'd worked with before. And that was when I got involved. And we introduced, as I said, the concept of integrated project teams. But what we actually did is we changed the organisation, we changed some of the role definitions, we introduced a different financial reporting system. We put in a project office. We rearranged the whole working environment. So it was a really holistic and systemic change. I'm not going to talk about the whole of that change, just going to talk about the who part of the change, so that we've been talking about. So the individual impact differed by role and perception. So some people really welcomed the change. Some people were very set and liked it how it was. Thank you very much. So we had a real mixture of positive and negative. We used various tools. We took a systemic approach. So we looked at the big picture and did all the changes at the same time, but didn't do them as individual changes. We involved individuals in the approach as soon as was physically possible. Not everybody, but we did involve individuals in the approach. And we also did a roadshow where we communicated with everyone, and when we were in that sort of real exploration and informed out stage. A lot of active listening and a lot of coaching and mentoring for the individuals that would be working the system as we move forward. There was active stakeholder management, but we focused on key individuals. So rather than trying to work with everybody, we focused on those key individuals to maximise the likelihood of success and build some advocates. And then there were some real benefits from an improved performance perspective. So improved milestone adherence, forecasting accuracy, customer advocacy increased, customer complaints reduced, and the Helmer score was the highest in the area, or the second highest in the UK. Do you want to add anything to that, Stu? What?
No, all I would say is it was a really enjoyable experience from my part. Obviously, I joined Area 10 not long after James joined, and when Sally came in, the energy in the building seemed to change. For those who know the Highways England and the contracts, we were on I think it was our 4th contract director in less than 2 years. Weren't in a great place, facing being removed from the contract. And this was our huge transformational change program. And behind this, like I said, there was about 17 or 18 individual projects that involved the best part of 300 people across the contract. It was a really, really great thing to do, and I was glad to be part of it, because it's seen now as being quite a success.
Marvellous. Thank you for sharing that. So I just want to talk about, and I was thinking about this, I should have put a little elephant in the top corner rather than an old hat. So there's been some talk on social media recently that Kubler-Ross's model is old hat. But my opinion is that with all models, it's about how you apply them. They're not formulaic. It's about how you use those models when you're working in the business world. And that there are other models around. So I'm not going to talk you through them particularly. I'm going to share them with you. And then if you're interested, they're ones you can go and have a look at. But they take a slightly different perspective. So the first one is Bridges transition model, which is very much focusing on the people and the transition that works for them. So how do you get them from one place to another place? The second one is the positive change cycle, which you'll see similar language to that on the change curve that I've been talking to you about. There's the process of transition, which is similar to change curve, but you'll see it's got quite a few jumping off points. So people will go into those different jumping off points. And again, it's focused very much about the individual rather than maybe the business. And then the last model is the ADCAR model, which takes you through those 5 different steps. The premise behind this is that you can't take people straight to ability and train them if they haven't got the awareness and desire to make that transition. And there's a questionnaire that you can complete that helps you understand where people are along the ADCAR model. So I've used ADCAR a few times. It's quite powerful in the right situation. So in summary, change is a constant in our society, more so than ever before. It's multifaceted. Our emotions change over time. And for sustainable change, you need to help people transition along the curve, be prepared for that washing machine cycle, realise that it's never personal, and think about the non-return valve from the outset. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions now and for the next 15 minutes or so. And as I said at the beginning, any questions around change really doesn't have to be around the change curve. I've been doing it for quite a long time now. So yes. Shall I shut this screen so I can see the questions, Stu?
Well, you can do. I can ask you a couple of things that have come in. There's a couple of that, a comment that says too many organisations change the process and forget to do the training.
Correct.
I kind of agree with that. That was one of the things that we sort of put a lot of emphasis on, was actually make sure we got the training as well. And there's a question: isn't it important to ensure all individuals understand the objectives and benefits of the required change up front so they participate positively?
Yes. So absolutely, objectives and benefits. I would add something else into that, and I use the word outcomes, because what outcomes do you want to get from the change that you're delivering? And if you can think in terms of outcomes, and I'll come back to that for processes, then that makes a real difference. I think the challenge with sharing the objectives and benefits is absolutely they need to be shared up front. And there will be some people that say, thank you for sharing that with me. I think this is a brilliant idea. And there will be other people who say, probably not even thank you for sharing it with me. Well, it's all the same old nonsense, isn't it? And I don't believe a word of it. So you will always get that, but if you don't share it with them, you're in a much worse place. So I absolutely agree that starting with sharing what the objectives, benefits, maybe what the vision is, you know, what you're trying to achieve. The worst thing that you can say though is, well, it's going to improve shareholder value, because actually for most people in a business, depends who you're speaking to, obviously, but for most people in a business, that's a bit irrelevant for them. So unless you're speaking to very senior managers, when shareholder value is very important, when you're talking to the guys and girls that are doing the work, it's putting it in the right language. And I was working with one of the defence companies recently and doing some training. And one of the guys looking after all their processes. And I said to him, so when you're thinking about process, what outcome do you want? Do you want everybody to be working in a different way using the new process, or do you want to have written a great process? Because if you start with the outcome that we want people to be working in a different way, you probably would put together the project plan differently. And my challenge often is that people will write the process and then think, oh, I was going to swear then, oh, darn it, we need to do the training. So actually thinking about the end outcome first means that you put training into the plan and that gets signed off. Because without training, it's just a lovely document, and this is showing my age, sitting on a shelf somewhere or sitting on a hard drive.
So we've got an interesting question that's come in from Peter from A1. I hope I pronounce this right, Peter. Do you recognise and empathise with the experience of Petronius, extract from the writings of the Roman Petronius Arbiter, governor of, I can't even say that, who committed suicide in AD 65? We trained hard, but it seemed that every time we were beginning to form up in teams, we would be reorganised. I was to learn later in life that we tend to meet any new situation by continually reorganising, and a wonderful method it can be for creating the illusion of progress while producing confusion, inefficiency and demoralisation.
Oh, that's marvellous. Thank you for thank you for sharing that one. The challenge that we have in all businesses is that when new management come in, they tend to think, well, I'll do something differently. And we've all seen this, haven't we? And we flip from, so we can take functional reporting through to integrated project teams as a good example. So we report in functions, and then we start reporting by the technical expertise in the organisation. So it's really frustrating, isn't it, in industry, because we do tend to flip-flop between those two things. Usually with the right intention, I would say, because I am that eternal optimist. I don't think they usually do it to bamboozle, but I think what happens is it means that people in the business get very disenfranchised and disinterested and disengaged. And it's a real challenge for particularly the very large organisations that seem to do this on a cycle, and they'll do it for about 5 years and then they'll go back. And a lot of us have been in post for a long time, and we see it's like, well, we've done this before. So if you're doing something like that, it's, well, why is this going to be different? And it's about saying, well, let's think about what outcomes. So if you're in charge of it, if you're in the thick of it, then I absolutely understand that it becomes very frustrating. I think I've just empathised rather than resolving that one.
Yeah. So another question. Do you agree that positions within integrated project teams should be filled by best person for the job, irrespective of which stakeholder employs them?
I do, yes. I'm going to put a very small caveat on that. Sometimes, so in an ideal world, absolutely. Sometimes contractually that can be difficult to achieve. So if you know you're going to work with integrated project teams, then the ideal is to put some of that flexibility into the contract, so it enables you to do that.
Okay, I'm gonna try something now. So has anybody got any more questions they want to ask Sally? If you raise your hand, and I know you're typing a question. Oh, Rosie, okay. Oh no. Here we go. What does Rosie say? So Rosie, but thank you for the session. Interesting insights, and the importance you highlight on how we use language as transformation leaders is absolutely on point. Being adaptive to audiences' emotional position is key, but we must do that with an awareness of how they talk about the situation, adapting our language to what matters to them and what their stake in the change journey might be. And she would welcome your thoughts, Sally, on that.
So there's I don't know whether you call it a tool, but there's something that I do, which I just call it walking in the shoes of, and I do try and put myself into the shoes of the individuals. And sometimes that means I might go and find someone that I'm, friendly with, or I've got a relationship with, and we'll test my language before if I'm going to do a formal presentation, we'll test the language before I go and share it with them. Because I think absolutely right, if you get the language wrong, and you can come across as being really pompous and not listening to them and not grounded, and they don't want that. They want to feel, I think, when you're doing change, that it may not be the change that you want, but you've got their best interests at heart. And someone said to me, and well, he didn't lose his job, he lost his position, so his at the end of the change. And I thought he wouldn't be my friend for a while, but he said, you know what, it was absolutely fair. It was a fair process. You used the right tools and techniques. I don't like the outcome, but I know that the process was fair, and I understand why we got to where we got to. And that's what you want at the end of any of this. So I think Rose is absolutely right. Checking your language and making certain that it resonates, and being human about things, because we do all have these emotions. And I think being honest with people is the best that you can be. Sometimes that honest answer is, I don't know the answer, or I can't tell you the answer. But that's more honest than bluffing, I think. So, but yeah, so try and, if you can, test it out with people that have worked in with that team, or who have worked in that sort of a role.
Okay, great. Any more questions, anybody? Looking like that might be it, Sally. There's lots of positive feedback coming in on the chat, Sally.
Oh, brilliant.
They're really pleased. A lot of sort of positive feedback from the presentation. So thank you everybody for joining the session this afternoon. Like I say, we've got a great program lined up over the next sort of 9 or 10 weeks. I hope you'll join the other sessions, and please start promoting them with the rest of your teams and around the industry. We can make a bit of a difference if we all get and sort of enjoy these presentations and start to take some of the learning out there into our own projects and companies. So Sally, I thank you once again. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I hope you. Sally does. By the way, Sally does a lot of sessions on LinkedIn as well. If you want to link with her, she does a number of webinars on LinkedIn. So please feel free to join those. And I'm going to stop the recording now and wish everybody a great weekend. Stay safe and stay well. And Sally, thank you very much for your presentation. It was a joy.
Thank you, absolutely my pleasure. And have a good afternoon and weekend, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing.